I'm just here to tell you a little bit about the OSS project, which is, this is the ending event for this project. We could have been spending all day just telling you this, but hopefully you all agree that this has been a more interesting day than if we'd done just what the project's been up to. But we do encourage you to go look at the website. We've got our definition of e-research that Ralph might talk a little bit more later, that it's about research using digital tools and data for the distributed and collaborative production of knowledge. And this is what we've been studying for the past 6 years or thereabouts. It's a collaboration of the Oxford Internet Institute, the Oxford E-Research Center, the Institute for Science, Innovation and Society at the Saïd Business School. A number of people across these institutions, as you can see, have been involved. It's a big project that's taken a long time, but we've also had lots of outputs. The team that comes from it, this is Boyack, Clavens, and Borders' science overlay map, and the expertise of the team placed onto this. And you can see that we come from a lot of different disciplines that we are bringing into understanding how computational approaches are affecting the way science is done, social science is done, the humanities, and even the arts now. We've had a lot of publications, as you can see here. We've been quite active as a group, making lots of things. We've also attracted lots of additional funding. So this is an example of the offshoot projects that have come out of this. So does this little pointer work? So we've had, from the Oxford E-Social Science Project, funding from many other organizations to do many other projects. And if we had done the boring version of this day, we could have talked about all of these ad nauseum, because we can talk for hours about any of these things. But instead, we'll encourage you just to go look on our website and read about some of these projects, because they've all been written up and discussed in other places. And we've got lots of collaborative links that we've built over the last years. This will continue to go on because we've got additional projects. We've got new funding coming in all the time. So even though the Oxford E-Social Science Project will end, the work in this area will continue to go on, and we hopefully will continue to influence policy and so forth. So that's just a bit of a cheerleader job that I'm doing to tell you this is what we didn't do today, but we hope you do go look at our work and find other examples of the things that we've done over this time. And then Ralph, I'm going to hand over to the next 10 minutes or so to give you a bit of the thinking that he and I have been doing toward the book we've been working on.
Okay, that's great. I was going to just say, I mean, Bill said that we're not going to do a review of the whole E-Social Science project, and of course that's, in a way, what we've done. We've given you these kind of... Yeah. I mean, we've given you these, just to go back, I mean, we've given you all these... We've given you some of the figures for publications and so on, and of course this is kind of, this is the volume, you know, and... but actually, obviously, you need to kind of go to those things in order to find out what we've been up to all this time. I was also just going to mention in passing Mongolia. I really like that because a few years ago we got an email from somebody in Mongolia saying we are just about to set up a Mongolian e-science effort, and can you help us, please? Can you give us some advice? And we actually sent him a paper. I'm not sure that Mongolian e-science is any better for it, but so we do have influence far and wide. This next slide, speaking of international influence, we've shown this at other conferences, and this is just a way of saying this data is now quite a bit out of time, was done a long time ago, but basically what you see is that the UK is right behind the US. If you look at the publications in relation to citations and in relation to the word e-research, if you do a keyword search on that. And it's kind of interesting also what kind of differences there are where China, for example, has a very different ranking in conferences as opposed to the web and so on. So I think one way to think about e-research that we had during the second phase of the project, which I think is interesting, is that we looked at, we were tasked in the second three-year phase with looking at how e-research changes the quality of research. And just to mention the kind of lens that we looked at this through, I think one of the things that happens with e-research is that it either intermediates even more, that is to say, you put some digital materials between the researcher and his or her object, or you can, of course, disintermediate. You can give researchers more direct access. And both of these could have positive and negative or indeed neutral effects on the quality of research. But that's just one of the things that we looked at in the more recent papers that we've done. And then here's just a list of kind of some of the cases that Eric and I have done, Marina and her team, and Steve Wolgar, who have also been involved in this project, have done lots of other cases. This is just to give some idea of the variety of cases we've looked at, which come all the way from the sciences to humanities and every point in between. And this is the final slide, which is a very dense slide, but it's basically the book. I mean, it's kind of what Eric and I are working on, and we've come a long way in it, and this summarizes the argument. And the argument, briefly, is that there is a kind of scientific realist and technological determinist argument at the bottom. Bill just mentioned all these different schools, but I think it's worth just remembering that what we're talking about when we're talking about e-research is knowledge. And in order to understand knowledge, we have to distinguish between the validity of different kinds of knowledge. We have to look at what knowledge is. Is knowledge advancing? If so, how? And our argument, basically, is coming back to the definition of e-research that Eric gave earlier, is that in some form or another, whatever e-research is, whether it's in the humanities or the sciences, you can actually generalize about it. And if you generalize about it, what you find is that what all these efforts have in common is computational manipulability. So one way to say this, or something that I've argued together with Eric also more recently, is that this is essentially a mathematization of research. It is a way of making all researchers focus on symbol manipulation. And after all, that's what a computer is. It's a kind of mathematical machine. And there are very interesting ideas there about why mathematics is at the root of kind of all kinds of sciences. But we don't want to make an argument about mathematics. We want to make an argument about computational manipulability of data. And the other thing that computers do is they can aggregate it. They can manipulate it, but they can also just store, add a lot of stuff. And that's even kind of implicit in the way the language about e-science has changed, right? I mean, when we started this effort more than 6 years ago, all the talk was about the grid. And then we moved to web services, and nowadays it's the cloud. But you know, all these are kind of different ways of talking about the fact that you're just able to aggregate a lot of stuff out there somewhere, and you're able to manipulate it. But then there is, of course, social shaping going on. We've heard a lot of different ways in which this occurs today, but I think our way of seeing this is through a kind of social movement lens. That is to say, who are the funders, who are the researchers, what kind of movements are they making towards gathering resources for their own research, and why are they doing it? And a lot of it has to do with funding, and a lot of it has to do with trying to have new intellectual movements. That's this reference here, Frickle and Gross scientific intellectual movements, who argue that you can see new innovations, to come back to a word that Bill used a moment ago, that you can see new innovations in the intellectual space as movements that are trying to gather control by aggregating resources and also aggregating attention to their own work, whether by tweeting or by other methods. And I think another core of this is the technology. And technology, as I've argued on a number of occasions, is really core to research. It's not the ideas of researchers that matters so much as that you have new instruments. And new instruments, I would argue, have been the key to the whole of modern science. They've driven science forward. And Peter is nodding vigorously because he can probably document this through citation. But I mean, this is a very interesting idea, I think, and it's a very undervalued idea that, you know, we kind of think that we are the ones who are making science. I think it's telescopes and microscopes, and I think all these kind of tools that we have, they're actually driving it forward. And there are good social reasons for that too. I mean, machines just focus our attention. They are cores that we can kind of focus on. If they don't do what we like, then we try to improve them, we try to strengthen them, and they are kind of drawing a lot of attention of the research community. So those are three elements. All we need is a fourth, and that is that, as somebody called Joachim Glaser has argued, one of the things that's really missing in the sociology of science is that science is exploding. You have lots of different things going on in a lot of different places. But in many fields, there's a core, a community that's focusing on a single project or idea. I mean, the Human Genome Project is just a kind of exemplar here. But physics provides a lot of other examples. Maybe social science is also focusing the community onto a new research front. And there aren't that many research fronts in any given field. There are only a few groups working at any given time on the moving research front, and they're really what's pushing it. So this is a kind of whole sociology of the e-research space. So you need an idea about knowledge, you need an idea about social movements, about technologies, and you need ideas about how cores advance at the research front. And what you can argue then is that e-research really becomes a much more autonomized apparatus or set of apparatuses within a whole set of different disciplines. And then you can ask quite critical questions to come to the last point that Bill asked about this, and to come back to the earlier slide where I was talking about the intermediation and disintermediation about research. Once you know that it's much more about an autonomous apparatus, then you can also critically interrogate what that's doing to our whole idea about knowledge. So, I've given you a kind of 2-minute, well, probably more like 4-minute tour of the core ideas of the book. What are the implications? Well, one of the implications, and I think we've heard this really throughout the day in lots of different ways, but especially in the session about research communication, is increased reflexivity. So I would argue that technology causes this increased reflexivity, because nowadays, I think unlike in 1970, or whenever it is that we were talking about in terms of science communication, researchers are just much more aware. Where is research moving? How am I affecting it? What's my place in it? I mean, who on earth was worried about their website, or who on earth was counting citations a few years ago outside of information science? Who was bothered by that? Has that been a part of what technology is driving, and what impact is it having on our research? But whatever else, whatever other impact it's having, it's allowing us a kind of map of where research is moving almost in real time. I mean, you can measure some fields and some ways in which people are reading journal articles almost in real time. So we have a much greater reflexivity. And this next point, I think I won't belabor, but a lot of you have talked today about how that also changes our role as researchers vis-a-vis the public. Because nowadays the public can also see a lot more what we're doing, and they can also become more reflexive about our role. So finally, what are the implications for kind of research? And we would argue that one of the things that's happened in e-research, and particularly in the social shaping or social construction area, is that the social construction or social shaping typically focuses on individual case studies. So here a case study, there a case study, here's a different field, there's a different type of knowledge being produced, and so on. All very good. But what's missing there is a synthesis. What's missing there is an overall understanding of how research is changing. And I would argue that there's something very fundamental in social shaping or social construction approaches, its methods, its epistemology, that prevents it from having such a generalized picture. And I would argue that we need it. So that also means that you don't just look at the sociology of science, you also look at more sociology more generally. You take into account information science, you take into account a number of different disciplines. And that's, I think, what Eric and I are trying to do. The second point is about policy and practice. And I think I've already talked about how you need to think critically about this, what I've called the autonomized, I'm not even sure that's a word, but it sounds pretty good anyway. But you need to think about this autonomized apparatus quite critically and its role in society, with all the implications for intermediation and disintermediation that it implies. But I think ultimately, and I think a number of you have talked about this again throughout the day, is we need to think about how this is redrawing boundaries within research, because quite clearly computer science is becoming much more important, and we are engaging, all of us, no matter whether we're scientists or humanities scholars, social scientists, with computer scientists. It's redrawing boundaries, not only within knowledge, but also between knowledge and society for some of the reasons that I gave. So that's it. Thank you very much.